and welcome to the SheClicks webinar about movement in landscape photography. I'm Angela Nicholson and I'm the founder of SheClicks. Before we get going, we have a word from our sponsor. This webinar is sponsored by LensBaby, the manufacturer of hand-built creative lenses that enable special effects such as velvet, sweet, edge and swirl in camera, freeing you to deliver your vision and connect with your photography in a deeper and more meaningful way. So thank you very much to LensBaby. Okay, so now it's time to hear from our speaker, Claire Carter, a photographer and workshop leader. Hi, Claire. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Lovely sunny evening up here in Scotland. I hope you've got the same. A little bit about me. I'm a self-employed photographer, but I shoot any genre if somebody's going to pay me to do it, basically, because it's quite difficult to make a living purely from landscape and nature photography. But that's my passion. That's what I love doing. I've been doing this for over 20 years now. There's my website, and I'm on Instagram as well. Just to set the scene, really, people are always asking me how I make a living in photography. I'll point out that sometimes I'll do commercial work, and not so long ago I was taking pictures of septic tanks for a company. So it's not all glamorous, but I write for magazines, hold exhibitions, which is a joy. I run workshops and tours abroad and in the UK. And do lots of botanical and macro photography as well, which I'm just setting up in the Highlands of Scotland, and Northern Lights tuition too. So why this title, Perpetually in Motion? It actually began over 10 years ago now, because I was teaching people how to shoot birds in flight. So people who wanted to go and do wildlife. And a guy said to me, I don't take landscapes, it's too static. He said he preferred photographing wildlife because he liked the challenge of moving subjects. And he went on to say a little bit more. And basically, I got the idea that landscapes, from his point of view, were just that little bit too easy. You put your tripod up, you rock up at the right time in the right place, click, 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 and you're done. It got me thinking, and it did jar with me just a little bit, but I wasn't going to contradict him because he was a paying client. But, is there a lack of challenge in landscapes? Do you need more technical skill to be a good wildlifer? I do find wildlife challenging, and it's one I embrace. But I have to say that I probably find landscape photography equally, if actually not more demanding. And I then started to think about that, and I started to think about this word static. And why it just didn't fit with me, why I wasn't comfortable with that word static. And I thought about my own movement, and here in this picture, I was 13,754 kilometres from London in Patagonia. So I have been moving in ever increasing circles to find subjects in light. But that wasn't it, because I know that I can go back to the same places again and again and again and never get fed up with them. And the one thing that photography has taught me to do is to stand still, because I'm waiting for something to happen. So I thought about the passage of time, which you might like to consider as being the fourth dimension. And there's no doubt that over a period of time, I've begun to see this is absolutely fundamental to being a landscaper, because it's passage of time which generates change, seasons being obvious, but it's much more than that, because as a photographer, we select our shutter speeds, and we can choose to freeze a moment in time, a split second, or we can keep our shutter open. And if there's movement while our shutter is open, we can get a creative interpretation. And that interpretation may indicate that things have been moving, or it might give an impression of change. And I believe, to be a creative landscaper, that movement, therefore, is absolutely essential. Now, because I started off shooting landscapes many, many years ago, that's where I learned to use a camera. And that landscape, therefore, influenced me no matter what I'm shooting. And it's looking for light. And, you know, it doesn't matter what sort of photography you take, you know that light is key. And this is an example where I was with a group of people on Clee Hill in Shropshire, and I was saying to them, watch the light, because that band of orange light was slowly working its way towards us. And I knew that once it reached us, there would be a dramatic change like that. So light moves over the landscape. Light is constantly in motion. In this picture, which was taken on Rannoch Moor, the light is behind the subject. And so very much you are looking behind the tree and the rock, and the mountains become a big part of that image. Your eyes are drawn backwards, but that light moves, and that light then is actually on the rock and tree. And the mountains become the canvas to the picture, and the subject is changed. Sometimes you take a picture and you think, yeah, okay, quite like that. And then you might walk away and then never go back again. But if you keep on going back again and again, every now and again something happens that you don't expect. And it's usually to do with weather and light. This is taken in Iceland, somewhere where I have driven many, many, many times. And I know that in my mind, I would have looked at that scene and thought, oh, those pylons, you know, they wreck the landscape. And then one day you drive along and the wires have turned into spiders' webs and sparkle in the right light. Things are constantly changing. So as already said, you know, doesn't matter what photography do, we're looking for light. And I do a lot of studio photography, especially with botanical subjects. And within that environment, I can manipulate the light. I can put it where I want it. When I'm doing landscapes, though, I have to wait for it to arrive. So I began to think more about this whole idea of the landscape photography being about things that move. And the rotation of our planet obviously gives us constant change. The sun will come up in the morning, it will traverse across the sky, it will set. And the next morning, it will come up in a slightly different place. And day by day, that sun is rising in a different position until the cycle starts all over again. And as a consequence, as landscape photographers, we now have joy of joy tools on our phone, which will actually tell us, you know, if we're stood anywhere in the world, whereabouts and at what time the sun is going to rise and how it's going to move across the sky and where it's going to set. And the same for the moon and the same for the stars. You know, Eureka, this is fabulous because this is what we need. And then because of the tilt of our planet, we get the seasons. Unless you're in the equator. And then every season has a jewel, and we're just coming out of the poppy season. And then before that, we had the bluebell seasons. And then I'm looking forward now, because I'm living in Scotland, to the heather season, you know, in particular, though that's in Wales. And then the autumn colours, which is, you know, every landscaper, you know, waits with anticipation for the autumn. And then, of course, trees are so affected by the seasons, which means you can go back to one tree, just one tree again and again. And this was one of my favourite trees in the wire forest. I liked it because it had this slight tension because it looks like it's falling. And in the autumn, it looked like that, but go back in the winter, and you've got a totally different feel about it. And then the autumn mists, and indeed at the moment we're getting some mists up here as well, very early in the morning, about 3:30 in the morning. And then the spring greens, when everything is fresh and bright. And let's take this scene. This is winter in Patagonia. Winter, as you will see as this talk goes on, is very much my favourite season. But try and imagine this in the summer. You probably wouldn't even see the mountains. In the spring, it would be fresh and green. And then the autumn, I mean, here it's famous for the autumn colours. So, you know, the seasons are, to us, as landscapers, are very, very key. That is very, very obvious. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. And, you know, I began thinking all those years ago how my photography is governed by movement and whether in a photo you can actually infer fourth dimension, i.e. can you actually infer that something has happened while you've been shooting. Now, if I show you a sequence of images, that's very, very easy to show that there can be change. And it could be a sequence taken over years. What I'm going to show you is a couple of sequences taken over a short period of time. So the first one is Lofoten Islands, 2013 now. But what was extraordinary about that trip was they were getting the deepest snow that they'd had in 50 years. And, you know, you're talking about serious snow. And what that did, it restricted where I could go. But it actually didn't matter because all I had to do was stand and wait. And eventually things were going to change. So on this day, I couldn't go anywhere because the snow had got under the wheel arches on my car and it had frozen up. Couldn't move. So I was stood on the decking of the place I was staying. Nice view, admittedly. But what was happening during this trip is there was wave after wave of snowstorms. And everything's beautiful and clear, but I knew there was another one on the way. The clouds were getting darker. And then the clouds passed by. And now you're taking lots and lots of pictures because second by second, as those clouds are moving by, you're getting different shapes in the sky. And then that was moving off. And then the storm hit and it snowed. And then very little time later, that snowstorm disappeared. And now it's light. And now it's the blue hour and the lights have come on. So I've moved nowhere. I've just had to stand there and I've had to wait for the action. So another example of the series. Again, in the Lofoten Islands in Norway, but this is July. And at this particular time in July when I was there, the sun was setting for about half an hour. So you have a sunset that becomes a sunrise. Fabulous. And so you actually stay out all night. So I started shooting at 11 o'clock in the evening, and this sequence actually ended in the end at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't go anywhere. I was staying on this small peninsula of land which was sticking out into a fjord, and I was just rotating round and following the light. So with landscape, it's a good idea to turn up when things are still a bit dull. If you turn up when the light's good, you're running around like a headless chicken. And I've done that lots of times. But if you can turn up a little bit earlier and try and sort out your compositions, you know, what's going to be interesting. So what have we got here? We've got a little pointy mountain on the left. We've got this rather grey blob of a mountain being reflected in, this is a sea field, believe it or not, reflected in the sea. 3 little stones. 3 things together always work well in a composition. So, yep, that's good. Let's see what the light does and come back to it. This little bit of green algae, that looks interesting, and 3 more stones. So we'll probably return to that. Then the light begins to drop and you start getting some nice colours in the sky. And the sun was actually setting behind me. And there's Pointy Mountain again. So we have the sunset. And then that very quickly turned into a sunrise. Though having said that, sunsets, then sunrise, you're probably talking about at least an hour and a half altogether, because of the way that the sun very gently dips and then rises. But there wasn't an awful lot happening. The colours were changing, fantastic, but the clouds themselves weren't actually moving because there wasn't any high level wind, and there wasn't anything else moving other than the sun. But obviously, beautiful colours. Then eventually the sun starts to come up and I turn back to Pointy Mountain. And now there's this lovely rusty coloured light on top of the mountains, which is fantastic. Very often this is going to be the best it's going to get. And so you rush back to all your compositions. Little Grey Mountain has now turned into a lovely red mountain. Going back to those compositions, getting as many shots in as I can, expecting the light to go. There's that little bit of algae. There's the 3 stones. And then what happened was the sun was behind me and it actually found a gap between 2 mountains as it was coming up. And so now I've got light on the foreground, which totally changed the picture. So return to some of those compositions again. Back to Pointy Mountain. And then the quality of the light changed yet again. And this time it was an orangey yellow sort of colour. And what I want you to notice is that there's a canvas, a backdrop of clouds. It isn't blue sky. And this is actually really important to what is about to happen. Because when you have dark canvas behind your landscape, you very, very often get much more intense colours. So there we are, back to the 3 rocks again, Pointy Mountain. The field is still really, really flat because the only thing that is moving is that sun, or the planet spinning, and it gives apparently the sun is slowly moving. And then bingo, you're going to have to take my word for it. And I tell you that I've probably desaturated that because it was beyond belief. That mountain, that what started off as a grey mountain, was like it had been turned to gold. It was totally and utterly stunning. And I was with one other person and then she sent me a text, with I can't believe what we're seeing. And so rushing around again, getting all those compositions in, changing the lenses, getting as much as we can done. And then that light slid away. I think that what happened now was the sun now was going behind some tall mountains behind me. But I looked out to sea, and what often happens early in the morning is as the land begins to warm, you get a different weather system. And what was happening here was there was some clouds forming out to sea, and those clouds were being dragged into the land. So look at Little Grey Mountain, which had been a gold mountain. You can see now that in reality, it's a green mountain. It's got vegetation on it. And that canvas now has disappeared. That background canvas of the cloud has now dissipated. And the clouds from the sea are being dragged inland. And I like to think that what I now refer to as Magic Mountain was getting dressed ready for the day ahead. And then it was time for breakfast. And I keep returning. That's Little Grey Mountain in winter. It's a place that I take workshops to. It's not been found yet because there's a bit of a walk to get to it. But it's truly magical place. Same pointy mountain, actually taken from a more well-known location, but a beautiful spot. So moving on from that, what about forces of nature? What about things that move within the landscape? So I'm going to cover things like clouds and waves and snow. And I think waves is a good place to start because they are almost an example of perpetual motion, with the tides coming and going. And given an opportunity, I'd be at the seaside all the time. And I do think that you really do begin to learn about motion and composition and how different shutter speeds can affect your composition and the feel of a picture. Now, I'm a great believer of getting in the water. So I live in my muck boot wellies. And one reason for getting in the water is that you can get a slightly different perspective. And I get in the water, I'll have my tripod out, and I will be trying different shutter speeds because water's unpredictable. You know, I can't say to somebody, oh, you need a half a second exposure. Half a second may be far, far too slow. But what I do when I'm near water is I try and get a sense of the movement. I will, as you'll see later, occasionally shoot to actually freeze it, but I like to give a sense that the water is moving. And in this scenario, there's a nice colour in the sky, but there's no clouds. So the only thing that really is moving is the water. And so I'm making that foreground a big, big, big part of the picture and taking picture after picture, looking for the reflections, looking for the movement, changing my shutter speed, having fun. You know, it's playtime, folks. Same idea, different location, but now we've got much more drama in the sky and the clouds are moving and the lights falling on the mountains and the seas moving around. And, you know, these are times that you totally, as a landscaper, you know, wish for. It's pure magic. And again, wellies on in the water, lots of pictures, looking for those reflections in the wet sand. And then closer to home, Northumberland, Banbury Castle. On this occasion, I'm actually lying down. There's a rock shelf at this end of the beach. And to make the most of a wide angle lens, you do have to be quite close to your foreground. And I actually wasn't on a tripod here. I was actually holding my camera on the rocks, getting low, making that movement a big, big part of the picture. In the water again, this is Elgol in Scotland. And in this situation, you really do have to make sure that you are exposing for the whites that are in those waves. And in doing so, actually, everything else goes a little bit more dramatic. You have to be careful by the sea, because one moment it's like that, and the next moment you get wet. So you have to, you know, sometimes just stand and watch and see what the water's doing. Yes, I did get wet. And yes, I did spend half an hour getting the seawater off my camera. In this situation, the splash of the waves, for me, makes the picture. Don't want a longer exposure now. You want shorter exposure. Take that splash away and you've got a dirty piece of ice. Yeah, it's a nice sky, but I think the splash gives a context of what the weather's like. On Elgol again, you know, you don't want long exposure for this, you know, to try and catch those splashes. Same thing on the Antrim coast, the Giant's Causeway. You know, short shutter speeds to actually catch that water. This is a longer exposure, and this is probably as far as I'd ever go. If it had been any longer, you'd get totally burnt out where the white is. But I kind of like this one because it shows where the water's going, and it shows the action of those waves. On the Norfolk coast, very often, if you find something that's static and then see the effect of the water around it, so whether it's rocks or in this case groins, get your tripod out, get in the water, and just watch how the water's actually moving around something that's static. Or in this case, I put that stone in. The Northumberland coast hasn't got big dramatic mountains in the background, so you're very dependent on big skies and looking at the action in the water. Put a stone in and the water will move around it and give you a little bit more texture. And I can never remember whether this is the whoosh or the swoosh, but this is the water going back. And you very often get much nicer patterns when the water's actually going back into the sea. Isle of Harris, again, I stood for ages waiting for the tide to come in, because I knew that once it had come in, it was going to come over this rock shelf and generate this waterfall over the side. And the black and white for drama. Black rock sands in Northern Ireland, just a rock, but that's interplaying with the light, obviously. But again, it's something that's static and letting the water move around it, almost give it a hug. And I almost see the whites in that water as being like Guinness. And being Ireland, I thought that's appropriate. More ice. Again, this is the water going back. When the water was coming towards me and hitting that rock, that ice, the ice was actually rocking from side to side, but the swoosh was much more successful. And I think that shows you what the weather's like. It was fierce. On this particular occasion, it was beyond difficult to shoot in because of the wind. And I think you want to do that in a picture. Try and give somebody some sense of what the weather is like. As indeed that one is going. And again, that's the swoosh, that's the water going back. Same beach, totally different occasion. Everything's going on here, isn't it? But I think it's the water that gives you a sense of what the weather's really like. So what about when you're out during the day? When you're out during the day, there's bright weather. And as I say, I like to give a sense of movement in the water. So I will often put a little stopper on. And by putting a little stopper on, I've been able to get a 1.3 second exposure. And I'll use a big stopper as well sometimes. But I'll try both to see what's working. So this is a long exposure, and I'd spent ages here trying to get a shot, and it just wasn't working for me because I like the simplicity of the little fishermen's huts and the fact that they were very small in frame and the dark clouds, but the water wasn't working because it was really very, very choppy, and it was making it feel messy. So by putting on a big stopper and doing a long exposure, it flattens out the water and simplifies things. Waves sculpt into the snow in this example and generate that lovely pattern. And then, of course, water is going to pick up the colour from the sky. This is Penman on the Isle of Anglesey. And I think it's more about the foreground and the colour in the water. And that one, indeed, all it is about is water picking up the colour from the sunset. One thing I'll often do is I'll walk a tide line. So I've already said to you, I'm often using a very wide angle lens, so a 16mm lens, say. And a fantastic sunset. This is on near Fairborn in Wales, and fabulous sunset. But you know, if you're going to just take a picture of the sky, it's like one shot, isn't it? But if you look at your feet and see what's happening at your feet and see how the water is interacting and how it has sculpted the sand, you then get lots and lots of images. So take a picture, move a little bit further at the beach, find a different pattern, move up the beach, find a different pattern. And then what tides will do is every time they come in and then go out again, they leave a new beach. They leave a new painting for you to put into your picture. And one of the things to do, like in this example, is to walk along the beach and look where fresh water is coming over the sands. And where there's fresh water, there will be deposits actually settling onto the lighter sand. So you get this darker material on top of the lighter sand. And then that makes these wonderful, wonderful patterns, which can make great abstracts. Exactly the same idea on Leg Beach on the Isle of Egg. And then the tide will go out and it leaves a new rock behind, which wasn't there the day before. Did I move it slightly? Well, yes, I did. I gave it a bit of a kick to actually put it in the right position for the composition. And this is a very shallow fjord. And where the water is very shallow, you will often get these this ripple effect. And then put a bit of snow on top of it. And that's not going to be there very long because the tide is going to come in again. But for just a while, you've got these fantastic leading in lines. And this is the same place without snow. And this is the same place without water. Things are constantly changing. So what about freezing a moment? I mean, going back to the gentleman who started all this, he said that he preferred the challenge of moving subjects. And indeed, if you're shooting birds of prey, you've got moving subjects for sure, you know, 120 miles an hour, 180 miles an hour, a falcon in a full stoop. And so, you know, I thought about the fact I needed 2,000 per second to stop that falcon. And the one on the right, I was shooting at 3,200 per second. And I can remember this particular occasion. When I took the shot, I knew that something had happened, but our brain and our eyes cannot actually stop that sort of motion. And so we know something's happened, but we don't actually see something that's happening this quickly, which is quite interesting in itself, that, you know, a camera can freeze something and that's moving so fast. But I'd often ask myself, as a landscaper, I don't really need these sort of speeds, do I? Well, I was actually to be proved wrong, because I was at the Torrent Walks near Dolgellau once, and the water is thunders down here when it rains. That's why it's called the Torrent Walk. And I set up my tripod and I thought, okay, 2,000 per second should freeze every single little drop. Well, it didn't. And if it hasn't totally frozen it, you get like the slightly blurry water, which I call nasty water. And so I thought, okay, let's move it up. 4,000 per second, easy peasy. It still wasn't totally sharp. I needed to go up to 8,000 per second to actually totally freeze this water. And I was amazed. I was totally and utterly amazed that I actually got to use those sort of speeds in a landscape photo. Sometimes you need those speeds, though, to actually stop your water. And it's great fun. And using a very, very long lens and peering into the waves helps to keep you safe when the sea is lively. But you need very fast speeds to do so. This is Barmouth Prom. Back to Elgol. Venice. And this is just to show that here I was using fast shutter speeds to actually catch the water as it's splashing up. But then I totally changed my direction, and I decided to do a long exposure and to overexpose. So a very long exposure, the boats are moving, slightly overexposed, and you get this watercolor effect. We need movement in order to get that sort of picture. So Northern Lights and astrophotography. For me, photographing the Northern Lights is the ultimate in action photography. It is a passion, and I'm not going to show you many pictures of the Northern Lights because we have to move on. I've actually produced an audio visual showing in real time how the Northern Lights move, and it's actually an animation rather than a time lapse. But if you've never seen the Northern Lights, when they really start kicking off, they move, and they can move extremely quickly. This, however, isn't what the eye could see. So if I was setting my camera at, say, 30 seconds, which is about as long as you can go at a 16mm when you're at 16mm without the stars starting to streak. And if the aurora is moving very quickly, just like if you're shooting water, it blurs away the background. It paints in the background green. What I could see looked nothing like that. But this is where we can get creative, when things are moving. I love the challenge of doing this. It's fantastic. And sometimes, I mean, on this particular night, they were moving extremely quickly, and I had to get my shutter speed down to half a second in order to get the texture in the sky. Any longer, and you were just getting blurry Northern Lights. The moon, again, this is something which comes into shot. It's something that rises during the day or at night. And it also has a huge effect on our tides as well, doesn't it? So it's a big part of landscape photography. This is Norfolk on the Stretisham coast. It fills a big part of the image when you use a zoom lens, or it can turn night into day. So this is the full moon behind me, and it almost looks like daylight. And then with a wider angle lens, again, it's almost producing a star. And then the stars themselves are another source of wonder. And they are ceaselessly moving across our skies. We're actually in the Milky Way season, or coming to the end of the Milky Way season at the moment. More forces of nature. Wind. You obviously can't feel it in an image, but I think we can very much give a sense that it is windy. Flags, a little bit obvious. But what about moving grasses? You can, if you want to, freeze those grasses. You could have them stationary. But I like to give a sense of what the weather's like. So to actually let them move during the exposure gives a sense that it's windy. And this is Iceland, and Iceland is windy. Again, this is the Glyn Peninsula in Wales. I have got some shots where the grasses are still. I actually like the fact that they're moving there and they're slightly blurred. Here, the wind is actually pushing and flattening the grasses. Again, it's Iceland, and it was a very, very windy day. And the trees here, well, I have to be honest, it wasn't a windy day. It was totally and utterly still, which for Patagonia is very, very rare. But because of the prevailing wind, those trees have grown into that pattern. And, when people see this picture, they assume that it was very, very windy, but actually it was exceptionally calm. And then, of course, wind is driving the clouds. This is Clyncugenin in southern Snowdonia. There wasn't much wind at the lakeside, but there was several different weather systems going on as you got higher up. And I think it must have been really, really windy, quite high up. And so it was generating all these amazing different clouds. And, you know, very often when it's windy, you are going to get more interesting clouds. And then same place actually, but during the blue hour. And this is a 30-second exposure. The wind is pushing the clouds and you get this streaky effect. And it flattens the water. Or a little gentle breeze disrupt a reflection. Without that, it would look like an upside down house. Same thing along in the canals at Burano, at the side of a harbour. We know that wind can be a destroyer. You know, anybody who lives in, you know, near hurricanes or tornadoes knows about that. But the wind is also a creator. And sand dunes being an obvious example of how they can create these beautiful, beautiful patterns. This is actually on the Baltic coast in Poland, and an area of full-sized sand dunes that actually not many people know about. Poland is seriously worth having a look at. It's a fabulously diverse country. And of course, wind drives the waves. What about clouds? I think as photographers, we probably talk about clouds more than anything else. There's either not enough, they're in the wrong place, it's too many. But when they come right, they absolutely can make your picture. And in this occasion, I particularly liked it because the shape was echoing the shape of that little mountain. And then, like water, clouds take on colour of the sun. And that colour can have so many different qualities to it, from sort of oranges to beautiful baby pastel pinks. And then on a morning like this, moment by moment, the shapes are changing. They move and the light changes and the colour changes. And you have to stand here and take lots of pictures again to find one that suits you. Now, this picture irritates me. It feels slightly awkward. It's late beginning again. But I've clipped my clouds, and wildlifers will know the irritation of clipping wings. Well, landscapers, you don't want to clip your clouds either. I want to see the top of those clouds and the reflection of them in the bottom. So, you know, that, if you like, isn't working for me. But I then came to my senses and realised that actually, even though I was shooting at 16mm here, I can go wider. And I can go wider by turning my camera into portrait mode and then doing a stitching those pictures together. So now I have got all those clouds in frame. Clouds also can be a natural filter. They can enable you to do longer exposures. And I quite like this sort of weather, you know, when the weather is actually coming towards you. You probably know that you're going to get wet very soon, but very often this can be exciting weather. And then as the clouds roll by, it lets the light through. And so the light is rolling over the mountains. Or they can give this Wuthering Heights sort of effect to your picture. And on very, very dull days, what sometimes happens is that if you find a little bit of colour, that colour will really, really pop out, like Magic Mountain popped out with a canvas of cloud behind it. And then you can do the long exposures. With 49 seconds, you know, a very long exposure, a very smeary sky, but it flattened and simplified the water as well. And then on some days you think you're not going to get anything. And then the mountain plays peep-o through the tops of the cloud. Things appear and disappear. And I think this is just about the enormity of that cloud. This is the Andes. These are significant mountains. So how big is that cloud? A cloud can be a noddy hat on top of a mountain. It can be a hole. And this is interesting because it's a very, very, very wide pano. I've actually got it printed 2 meters long. And what was happening was I loved the sky. The sky was fantastic. And I was trying to take one frame with the little island in, and it just wasn't working because I felt that I was cutting the clouds in the wrong places. So I then noticed that dark cloud on the left-hand side, and that just balanced beautifully with that island. And so, I needed the pano, I needed the full scene, and panoramas are great for doing this. Again, talking about how wind can make more interesting clouds. I think these clouds almost look exotic. And this is iridescent cloud. You can just about see it above the tallest peaks there, that rainbow effect in the sky. And then I changed my lens and zoomed in and really exposed for that colour. Fabulous moment. That was going on behind me while that was going on in front of me. It was like Kid in the Sweetie Shop. You didn't quite know which way to turn. But this is Patagonia. High winds, so fabulous, fabulous cloudscapes. This night was so windy that it wasn't hold onto your hat, it was hang onto your car. And then just peering in one cloud, a cloud that rolls in on itself. Back to Scotland and, looking at how clouds can be reflected in water. In this example, not actually in the loch itself, but in a puddle of water, because the puddle was a lot flatter than the actual loch itself. So sometimes, look for puddles, get down low with a wide angle lens, you can turn a puddle into a lake. Reflection of clouds, but, not, on the face of things, a particularly fruitful day. But if you actually have got it reflected in the water, you're getting something more interesting. And clouds, as they move over the hills, will generate weather. So as you can see at the moment, you've got the rain is falling on the left-hand side of that little mountain. And that was moving. And then that weather moved beyond, and it's now, that's actually seaward now. It's now raining on the other side of the mountain. So is this case of things are constantly moving. So stand and observe and watch. Using a polarizer. So here I'm using it to look through the water. But if you turn your polarizer, you can make the most of that reflected cloud. So what about ice and snow? This is quite a long section, and I'm going to zoom along a little bit. If I'm not showing the pictures for very long, you can catch up with this because it's being recorded. So, snowstorms, I love them. You stand and you wait for them to do what they do. So here, there's a snowstorm on the way, but I'm still in the sunshine. Then it snows. Now it's behind me and it's blocking the sun, but there's another one on the way, and then wait long enough, it snows again. So stand and watch. Make sure you've got the right clothes on. And in this situation, having a zoom lens is ideal, because zoom lenses normally have long lens caps, lens hoods, and that will protect your lens from the snow. Like clouds and like water, ice is going to pick up the colour. This is Kirkjufell in Snæfellsnes in Iceland. The morning colour being reflected on that ice. And then it reflects. And in fact, it's better sometimes at reflecting the water, because you don't have to wait for the wind to drop, because obviously the ice is solid. And this is very recently down Glencoe. Several nights of very, very cold weather. I actually went back here several times to actually get a morning when there was some cloud. And here I've got my tripod, and I'm sitting on the ice, and I've edged out so I can actually get that view down what is known as the cauldron. Wet bum, it has to be said, because I kind of forgot that the ice was going to melt if I sat on it. Same place, but looking in a slightly different direction. This is Iceland, and to me, it actually screams Iceland, because you have these wonderful layers of lava, and the snow picks out that detail. Take away the snow, and you've got a bit of a black lump. Here, the snow is the icing on top of a cake, well, on top of a mountain. And then a very painterly effect, zooming into that snow, and it compresses the snow. It makes it look like there's more snow than there actually is. And, slightly blurry sort of look here. And when it snows, I get that long lens, get that long lens hood on, and just walk, looking for colours and textures and patterns. Huge fun. And of course, the white of snow is the whites in a black and white picture. This is actually a coloured picture, but these landscapes are naturally very monochromatic. And then sometimes if you've got a little bit of colour, boy, does it really pop out when there's snow about. And so ice will crack and it will buckle. This is sea. So when the tide drops, the ice begins to crack. The cracks can actually form fantastic leading lines. It melts and then traps within it stones, and you have these infinite patterns. Bubbles of methane gas which have actually been trapped inside the ice. This is a wider view of some bubbles. The frost on a rock in the morning. Right, I'm going to really start zooming through this now. I'll do about another 5 more minutes. So fleeting light, those moments when the light just pops for the briefest time, but they're magical and you can't predict them and you've got to be prepared. So this is 3 photos taken down Loch Ur very recently, this last winter. And the top left-hand one, the light is at the back, and then it moves and it catches the island, and then it moves again and catches more of the mountains. This was a fantastic day, just showing how light is constantly changing. And again, this is Loch Arkaig last autumn, and it wasn't looking like a promising day, but suddenly, just briefly, the sun popped out and it happened to catch that little island. This is Iceland. Iceland has got weird colours in the landscape anyway. And then if you add to that mix the rising sun, which is orange, you get the weirdest of weird colours in the landscape. But of course, it's not only about the light, it's also about the shadows, and the shadows will move. and the colour of the light will change. Here, this is Loch Slapin on the Isle of Skye, and the mountain on the right is casting a shadow on the snowy mountain. And of course, that's moving second by second as the sun is moving. You can zoom into shadows, finding the lights and darks. Look where the foreground is actually lit up, but the background is dark. Fantastic then, as a canvas. A slither of light, a morning light. Light which has just come out and it's caught that silver birch and turned it into a golden birch. The blue hours, very, very fleeting. You know, they're not actually an hour by any stretch of the imagination, or at least it isn't up in Scotland. You know, it lasts for a very short space of time, and it's blue and then it's gone. Same place a little bit later. Arctic blues. Now, the blue hour really probably is an hour in the Arctic due to the way that the sun is moving. And that's fantastic. It's glorious. Rainbows. Rainbows at the bottom of a waterfall, over the waterfall, catching the top of a mountain. And then in Patagonia, the morning light catching the Fitzroy Range, and you're changing your lens, you're making the most of this. You are working hard because these sorts of moments don't come around every day. You can go here and not actually see the mountain at all once. And then zooming even more to the very top of this peak, same time. And then you have light before the storm, when the quality of the light can be absolutely superb. And so this is in Poland again, in the Tatra Mountains. A storm is on its way. Bad weather is often when you get the bad light. And so it isn't time to go home. It's time to stand firm and see what's about to happen. This is just down the road from me. I've been past here many, many, many times now. Never seen that little tree looking like that again, because it was in the light and the storm was behind it. And the shape of the rain moving across the sky. And this is across Loch Linney, just not far from where I am. The rain being blown, making those lovely patterns. And a storm on the way. This was quite spooky because it was coming towards me and it was getting darker and darker. And I was just thinking, you know, what's it going to be like when I'm underneath it? I haven't got the rest of the pictures in that sequence, but it snowed and it was hard. Castle Stalker, the light on the foreground still, but the navy blues that you get when there's rain on the way. Mists. I'll just very quickly say something about mists. Mists are a little bit like water. If you have a very long exposure, you are going to lose the textures in them. You want some of the texture. So very often with mists, I can be hand holding to actually try and get the texture. Not in this case, though. Here, it's simplifying a picture, making things appear very calm. At that point, I'm going to draw it to the end, go back to that guy who all those years ago informed me that landscapes were too static. And they're not, folks, are they? There's nothing static about the landscape. No, perhaps very, very occasionally, everything will be still. I don't like that because all the midges then start to come out. Give me action, give me motion, give me the ability to be creative with my camera. And on that note, I will hand back to Angela and see if there's any questions.
Hello. Yes, we do have some questions. Fantastic. Okay. Right. So first off, we have a question from Facebook where someone was asking whether you carry a couple of cameras to save changing lenses, or do you swap lenses while you're out and about?
Yeah. Generally, I have two cameras. One which has got my wide angle lens on, my 16 to 35. The other one is really my opportunistic wildlife lens and camera. So, when you're out there early in the morning, things happen in terms of wildlife. So that is so I can quickly pick it up and perhaps shoot an eagle or whatever. But I also use that for the panoramas, which very often I will use, I'll do with the zoom lens, handheld. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, generally two bodies.
Okay, thank you. And when you're shooting seascapes with your tripod, how do you secure it to stop the movement, especially in rough seas, particularly when when the sand or even the shingle can get washed from under the legs?
Yeah. You do lose shots. There's no doubt about it. But to try and stop that, what I'm doing is I'm actually pushing down on the tripod. So, pushing it actually into the sand to give it something to grip onto. But you do lose them. It's constantly shifting. Yeah, but it is possible. I've known people say that they use CDs and things like that. It's not going to work, folks. They're just going to float away.
They use what? Sorry. Oh, CDs.
CD, yeah. Put the tripod legs, to give a wider platform. But no, that's not going to work.
Okay. And then the same person was also asked, what do you clean your lenses with to get rid of sea spray?
When I'm out, nothing in particular. I'm probably just using kitchen roll, to be honest. Maybe a bit of spit.
I have to say that's not the recommended approach.
Yeah, I haven't got time or the inclination to carry lots of fancy stuff around with me. So, no, nothing special.
I would suggest a proper lens cloth, or maybe a microfiber cloth, and have a little bottle of water or something.
Yes, that is very sensible. Yes.
But I guess we've all been guilty of using a T-shirt and a bit of spit occasionally, but I think a lens cloth is better. Okay. There's lots of people saying thank you very much for a really interesting talk, and they're going to talk to their camera clubs and recommend that you do a talk for them.
Fantastic.
Very nice to see. So thank you, everybody. How do you decide whether to go with black and white or colour? And do you always do it in post-processing, or do you decide when you're shooting?
I'll sometimes go out with the idea in my head that it is a black and white day. Mm-hmm. And then I will actually put my camera in mode so that I can actually see black and white in the viewfinder now with mirrorless or on the back of the screen. So that I'm actually thinking in black and white. Very often I will get back home and I will make the decision in post-processing that it's going to be more of a black and white image. One of those shots there was on the Isle of Harris, very, very moody black and white with the water moving over a rock shelf like a little mini waterfall. That rock shelf had quite a yucky sort of yellow colour to it and really didn't work in colour at all. Mm-hmm. Whereas the black and white generated a much more moody feel about it. Yeah.
But it has to be said that you can do it with SLRs if you switch to live view mode or you take the shot and look on the screen. But it is an advantage of mirrorless cameras that if you change the color mode, you can see where it's in black and white and color, and it does help you sometimes change or make your decision as to whether you're going to, what the image will ultimately look like, and that can affect your composition a little. Yeah.
I probably do it more with my studio work, my botanical work. Yeah. We're very much thinking, no, this is very graphic sort of subject.
Okay. Do you have any plans to create a photo book?
Probably. The one that I'm thinking of doing is probably studio botanical photography. I've begun to actually map that out and put it in terms of what the paragraphs and things would be. So that's the one I'm probably most interested in doing.
Okay. So watch this space.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe watch this space. Okay.
Yes, yeah, it's finding time at the moment.
Yes, you've got a lot on your plate just now, but maybe next year or something.
Yes, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. And what is your preferred lens for shooting aurora?
I use two. I use my 16 to 35 f2.8, and I've got a Sigma 14mm prime f1.8. Use both those. For many years, I just used the 16 to 35 2.8. The 14mm gives you a little bit more width than, you know, when it's a very big star. And being a 1.8, it's a little bit faster.
Yes. And I mean, 2mm doesn't sound very much, but at the wide angle end, it makes a big difference.
A big difference, yeah. And going from 2.8 down to 1.8, it makes a big difference as well in terms of speed.
Yes, because I mean, you get lots of more depth of field when you have a wide angle lens.
Yes, you do.
And you're shooting a very distant thing, so yeah, it means that you can shoot at lower sensitivity settings, ISO settings, so you get a cleaner image and, like you said, and easier to focus and all sorts, really.
Yeah, and you know, as I said in the talk, when the aurora is really kicking off, it moves incredibly quickly. And if you want to keep those textures in it, you need to keep your shutter speed sometimes below a second, which is a big ask at night.
Yes. Okay. Lots more thank yous and wonderful images, and they really appreciate your talk and your explanation. So that's very nice to know. You mentioned using a little and a big stopper, and they say, would that be 3 and 6 or 10 stop ND? So the little stoppers are 6, isn't it? And the big is a 10? Yeah,
so 6 and 10. I've recently moved over to case filters. Really enjoying them. They're good. Yeah, I'm finding the magnetic ones a lot easier to use.
It's odd, isn't it? Because, you know, in theory, sort of screwing a filter on the end of a lens is quite straightforward, but actually being able to pop it on and off with a magnet just makes everything so much easier. Yeah, and also it's the glass, the graduated filters are glass. So I was getting through too many filters. That's probably because of the kitchen towel and the spit, but I was probably surprised. Maybe.
Yeah. So the glass ones are suiting me better.
Okay. Do you use much post-processing to get the results that you do?
With my landscape, minimal. I am a big believer still in graduated filters. I'm a huge fan of them. That's just like my go-to thing. So getting it right is my thing, really. And I don't even like cropping, to be honest. I don't like chucking away pixels. So minimal. Though I do a lot of panos, and obviously they're stitched afterwards. But no, minimal. My botanical work has a lot more. So, you know, I'm not anti-processing. You know, I really enjoy the creativity within the botanical work. But for me, the landscapes, I'd like to think people could go to wherever I've been and be able to go, oh, yeah, you know, I recognise that from this picture.
Right. And what software do you use when you're processing?
Only Photoshop. Yeah, that's all.
Is it only Photoshop? But that is quite a substantial software package, isn't it? These
days?
Yes,
it is. Yeah, but I've never used Lightroom. I've used Photoshop way before Lightroom came along, and I could never make the switch, so I've just stuck with it.
Yeah, I'm the same. I did force myself to use Lightroom for 6 months, and I just went back to Photoshop. And actually, I primarily use Adobe Camera Raw anyway. So, which
is I mean, yeah, that is probably where 99% of my processing happens.
Yep, same here. It's very flexible these days as well. So
there's a lot in there.
Yeah. So, what shutter speed do you use for snow? And I think perhaps they're talking about the image where the snow was falling.
Yes. It's like all these things that move. It depends how fast it's falling, because snow can just fall very, very slowly, or it can be driven by the wind. So it depends on how fast it's going. So I'll take test shots and see what's happening. If it's too slow, you'll get a streaky effect. I prefer that effect where you can perhaps still see that it's flakes of snow in it rather than the streakiness.
Yeah.
So I'll take a shot, zoom in, have a look, see what's happening, and then adjust. Yeah, but it won't be, it'll be half a second maybe. So usually in those scenarios, I'm hand holding, so it will be, probably faster than that as well.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess if the wind conditions are gusty, then it might change a little bit from shot to shot, or you stick with one and see what you get each time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, I think all of the rest of the questions are actually comments saying great presentation. Thank you very much. Someone has mentioned that your spiral staircase makes a great backdrop. So that's nice to know.
I'll tell my landlord.
Yeah, it does look good. And someone else said they feel enthused to get out with their camera. So that's very good.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. If somebody says that, I'm happy. That's great.
Yes. Me too. And one thing I really like about our webinars is seeing all the images that they inspire. So it's lovely afterwards. People post pictures and say they saw this webinar and they've posted this picture, it inspired them to do that. So, if you feel inspired, please do that. Let us know that this webinar has inspired you.
And tag me in, please, because that's great.
Yep, because you're in She Clicks. Well, Claire, thank you so much. That was really good, really interesting. Lots of fantastic images, and I wish you lots of luck with the final stages of building of your house.
Thank you. 6 weeks.
Yeah. It'll be fine. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye then. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay. Bye, everybody.